So let's talk about a man whose ideas didn't just change a country, they completely re-engineered an entire society from the ground up. He took a nation that was literally on the brink of collapse and turned it into the most feared military force in the ancient world. This is the story of Lycurgus and how he forged the Spartan war machine.
But to get into this, we're actually going to start in a really unexpected place. Washington, D.C. Seriously, if you ever happen to be inside the U.S. House of Representatives and you look up at the walls, you'll see a marble carving of an ancient Greek warrior staring back down. And that right there is a fantastic question. Why on earth is a guy from Sparta, a notoriously brutal, anti-democratic military state, being honored in one of the great modern symbols of democracy? What could he have possibly done to end up there? To figure that out, we first need to understand who he really was.
So Lycurgus was the legendary lawgiver of ancient Sparta, and we're not talking about some minor historical figure. The famous biographer Plutarch put him in his Parallel Lives, which was basically his list of the greatest figures of all time. He's ranked right up there with names like Caesar and Alexander the Great. Why? Because his reforms didn't just tweak the system. He completely tore it down and built something totally new in its place.
But look, you don't do something that radical just for fun. To really get why he went to such incredible extremes, you have to understand the existential crisis that Sparta was facing. This wasn't a society just looking to make a few improvements. This was a society absolutely terrified that it was about to be wiped off the map.
See, for years, the Spartans had been locked in this unbelievably brutal war against their own slave population, the Helots. They just barely managed to win, and the whole experience left the Spartan ruling class completely traumatized. They knew they were outnumbered, and they lived in this state of constant gnawing fear of the next revolt.
And so this one question just hung over everything they did. It wasn't about getting richer or building fancier temples. It was about pure, raw survival. How do we keep a permanent lid on this huge, hostile population that we depend on for our very existence, but who could at any moment rise up and slaughter us all?
They needed someone to find a solution, a permanent one, no matter how radical it had to be. And the man they turned to for this impossible task was Lycurgus. He was a nobleman who had this reputation for being incredibly smart and, even more importantly, for having almost superhuman self-control. And there's this one story that tells you everything you need to know about him. He's giving a speech, and this angry kid in the crowd hurls a brick. It hits Lycurgus square in the face and completely destroys one of his eyes. Now, instead of screaming or calling for the guards, he just calmly picks up his own ruined eyeball, holds it up for the horrified crowd to see, and instantly wins them over. But then he does something even crazier. He takes the kid who attacked him home, not to punish him, but to teach him. And he eventually turns this kid into one of his most loyal followers. This was the kind of guy they chose to save Sparta.
So what was his grand solution? Well, Lycurgus looked at Sparta and decided the root of the problem was weakness and a lack of discipline. His answer was extreme. He was going to take the way things were, the social customs, and hammer them into an unbreakable, legally enforced caste system.
The whole set of laws was called the Great Retra, and it was all built on one simple, brutal idea: total control. He believed the Spartan elite had gotten soft and the slaves had been given too much freedom. From now on, everything and everyone would serve just one purpose: maintaining the military power of the state. So he drew these hard lines in the sand, creating a rigid, three-tiered world. At the very top, you had the Spartans themselves, the rulers, the warriors, the landowners. In the middle were the perioikoi. These were the commoners, the merchants and craftsmen. They were free but had zero say in politics. And way down at the bottom were the helots, who were basically state property, slaves with no rights at all who did all the farm labor.
And here's the kicker. This wasn't just how things were done anymore. Lycurgus made it the law. He legally enforced it. Spartans had to live in the city, the perioikoi lived in the towns around it, and the helots were stuck out on the farms. You couldn't marry between classes. He basically used the full power of the state to lock this pyramid scheme in place forever. Okay, but here's where his plan gets truly wild. You might think these laws were all about controlling the lower classes, right? Nope. The most radical changes, the biggest sacrifices, were demanded from the Spartan elite themselves. Their entire way of life was about to be completely destroyed.
It was over. The party was done. All the days of leisure, of philosophy, of art, gone.
From this point forward, if you were a Spartan citizen, your life had one and only one purpose: to be a soldier, always ready for war. Everything else, your family, your money, your personal dreams, it all came second to the needs of the state.
And this system, it grabbed you from the moment you were born and never, ever let go. At birth, elders would inspect you. If you seemed weak, you were left on a hillside to die. At age 7, you were ripped away from your family and thrown into the agoge, a state military school, for 13 years of the most brutal training imaginable. To graduate at 20, you had to pass a survival test that included sneaking out and killing a helot slave. Think about that. This wasn't just murder, it was a state-sponsored tool to terrorize the slave population and to drill into every young Spartan's head who the real enemy was. You didn't even become a full citizen until you were 30, and then you served in the army until you were 60. Your entire life belonged to the military.
And their education? It was exactly what you'd expect. I mean, while the Athenians and other Greeks were debating philosophy and creating amazing art, the Spartans were taught just enough to read and write. That's it. Why? Because they literally believed that thinking too much, asking too many questions, that it weakened a warrior's spirit and made him a less effective killer.
So you see the pattern here, right? Every single piece of Spartan society, their social classes, family life, their schools, was taken apart and rebuilt to serve one single goal: to create an unstoppable army and a state that could keep it running forever.
Even their government was designed for this. Sure, they had an assembly where citizens could talk about laws, but the real power? That was held by a council of elders, men over 60 who had survived the whole brutal system, and a group of 5 supervisors called F-Horse, whose job was just to make sure the whole war machine kept running smoothly.
And what you get at the end of all of this? Well, it wasn't really a city-state in the normal Greek sense anymore. Sparta had become one giant, high-intensity military base. Every person, every law, every tradition was just another cog in a machine built for one thing: war.
Which brings us full circle right back to that carving in Washington, D.C. After hearing all of that, how in the world are we supposed to think about this guy, Lycurgus?
On the one hand, you can make the case that he did what he had to do. His people were facing annihilation, staring down the barrel of a revolt that would have destroyed them. From that perspective, were these horrific laws just a necessary evil, the terrible price they had to pay to survive?
But then you look at the other side of the coin. The society he built was a monster. It ran on slavery, it practiced infanticide, and it completely crushed any spark of individual freedom or creativity. I mean, wasn't he the architect of a totalitarian nightmare, a system that basically destroyed everything that makes life worth living, all in the name of order and security?
And our source material kind of lands on this point. It argues that to really understand these reforms, you have to understand the sheer desperation of the moment. It says they were, quote, born from a place of helplessness, not an ideal vision for society, but a panicked reaction to a historical pressure cooker that was about to explode.
So we're left with this really complicated legacy. America's founders may have seen him as a man who brought law and stability out of total chaos, but the methods he used created a blueprint for military states for centuries. So the question for you is, was he a founder of law and order, or was he the father of militarism? The really scary answer might be that he was both.